And welcome everybody to today's Zoom webinar. I'm going to have to read this off because I don't understand all of these words. Collaborative Research Program for a DHA Redevelopment Project. So welcome. I am anxious myself to learn more about this. And I'm very grateful to Jeremy, Catherine, Ellison, and Shana for joining us and sharing this information with us today. And I also want to throw out a shout out to our sponsor for all of this webinar series, is Wells Fargo. Thank you for making all of this possible. And at this time, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeremy and let him introduce the rest of his team.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so my name is Jeremy Auerbach. I am a postdoc research fellow at Colorado State University in environmental health and radiological sciences. I'm here today with Catherine Dickinson and Ellison Carter and Shana Burkett, and I'll let them do their own introductions during their section of the slides. I'll hand it over to Shana to give a background of this great project and as it moves forward.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shana Burkett. I'm a program manager with Denver Housing Authority with our Community Connections Department. I've been with the Housing Authority for just about 20 years now, and I've worked in multiple capacities with various programs, all in the resident community services area, serving youth, school-age youth, older youth, adults, so pretty much the whole gamut. Currently, I work in the Sun Valley neighborhood, which is the neighborhood we are going to give our presentation on today. It's a neighborhood that's currently undergoing a redevelopment, a HUD redevelopment, Choice to the Choice Neighborhoods initiative. And I have also served previously in our previous redevelopments through our Hope 6 redevelopment grants. So the Sun Valley neighborhood that I'm currently working in is one of Denver's most unique, diverse, and also investable neighborhoods because of the close amenities it has in proximity to downtown Denver. We are located with Federal Boulevard to our west. To the south is 8th Avenue. 13th Street is to the north of us, and then the Platte River borders us on the east. Sun Valley is unique in its own census tract. It is also Denver's poorest neighborhood, as well as the poorest neighborhood in the state. So after years of successful community-led planning, the core of Sun Valley has been primed for redevelopment into a holistic district-based neighborhood of choice. The Sun Valley Choice Neighborhood Initiative Transformative Plan serves as a blueprint for redeveloping this inner-city neighborhood into a vibrant, healthy neighborhood with a focus on what we call our GROW priorities, which are to prioritize youth, family, and education, to develop intentional housing, place make through healthy food, create opportunity, and to create connections and open space, and to build sustainable infrastructure. One of the main goals of our redevelopment is to make Sun Valley more accessible as a neighborhood, as well as create the access to the greater city as a whole through infrastructure. So the transformation plan includes redevelopment of DHA's, Denver Housing Authority's, most isolated and distressed public housing neighborhood. We have 303 units that we are looking to develop into a thriving mixed income community that will be comprised of almost 100 units when, 1,000 units when done, and also further development with private market investment of up to 1,200 rental and home ownership units. Sun Valley is one of our highest needs communities, as I mentioned, with the highest poverty rate, as well as a high concentration of school-age youth. We have over half of our neighborhood is under the age of 18, and also we have 85% of our families living in single-parent families, as well as 25% of our families being immigrant or refugee families. There are currently over 33 languages spoken in Sun Valley. Just a little background on the process of, if you can put the screen slide back, go back one more, please. There we go. So just a little background on redevelopment, how Denver Housing Authority has done the C&I development in Sun Valley, as well as our other redevelopments. The planning process begins way before the implementation or the transformation of the neighborhood. So back in 2013, there was a station area plan that was done by the city, and then that's when the planning process really began for the neighborhood. Resident surveys were done that year with the residents to really get them engaged in this process and really determine what those needs were from the residents, what services and what gaps there were in the neighborhood. 2015, we began the Sun Valley Transformation Plan. And then in 2016, the implementation for a planning grant was submitted. And that community engagement process continued, but was really kicked off because we were awarded the one-year plan to grant to really submit what our plan would be for the neighborhood. In 2017 was implementation, as we were awarded the C&I Choice Neighborhoods implementation grant, and the people team, which is the team that I work for, really became engaged and really began going at their full force and working with the residents and just furthering that community engagement process. 2019 construction began, and then where we are now is that the people team is still here on the ground with the residents. We currently have 53 families that were relocated through our first phase of construction. We're looking for that first phase of construction to be done the end of this year, so December 2020, possibly January 2021. On an annual basis, resident surveys are conducted with the residents, and that is also on top of the programming, case management, the intense case management that happens with the residents through our people team's engagement. If you can go to the next slide. So as part of the community engagement process that began in 2013, it was what we heard from the residents was what determined what the focus groups were, and the focus groups are listed there. And we had 8 different focus groups that really covered the different needs of the residents in regards to education, jobs, economic stability, and then what the different areas were to engage in this process. As Sun Valley, as it consists now, is a very isolated neighborhood. The look was how to expand and involve Sun Valley into the expanding neighborhoods, including the Mile High District, the Lower Colfax area, expanded into the neighboring areas, as well as its access to the interstate that it has. The community master planning process determined what the GROW principles would be. And these were our areas of focus for the development, for the redevelopment, as well as for our grants we submitted. So everything we did was committing to focus on these areas that the residents had expressed that they needed and wanted, what was not currently available here. And that includes a strong focus on active space, health for the residents, what that looks like in the community, what that looks like for quality air access, what it looks for safety areas where families can congregate, walkable space, and what that looks for the building design as well. The next slide. Part of the community engagement process, the Denver Housing Authority began in its last redevelopment was really looking at health and the redevelopment through a health lens and how that can look for the entire redevelopment. So it's not just for what the infrastructure looks like in the community design, but also for the building design. So what does that look like for our developers and our architects and contractors that are going to come in? How can everybody be committed to making this a healthy community? So beyond just the resident survey, there also is a very large portion, and I say resident survey, it's pretty intense. It's 13 pages. So, and again, we do that on an annual basis with the residents. So it includes a large portion that's dedicated to health and what the dynamics of that looks like. For a little over a year, we had a private contractor come and really dig deeper into the health aspect of the neighborhood and the residents' needs. So not only just looking at what the residents self-identified as health issues they had, what those chronic health disparities might be, ones that we were pretty sure we would see and usually see in our health impact assessments, like high blood pressure, obesity, those things, but also what does the design of the neighborhood look like, and how do we increase the ability for walkability and pedestrian safety, and what does that look like for creating that community space so that the community really feels like this is a space that they feel is their own. So these were the areas of focus or campaigns of action, we call, in the health area. And just to point out some things that the health impact assessment really revealed is things like 1 in 4 residents say that they experience significant stress on a regular basis. 75% feel that there are no buildings or public spaces that reflect their culture. And that was something that was really important that we found, because we also did a cultural survey with knowing that the landscape of our community involves so many cultures, that we had 75% of our families say that they feel that Sun Valley is their home, but they don't necessarily feel that there are spaces if they identify with their culture. So that's really one of the key things that my team works on with our residents, is really helping to make sure that culture and art are also included, because a lot of that will, in turn affect mental health and mental well-being, being able to feel that the place where you call your home reflects what your culture is. So it just falls in line with these campaigns for action for the health impact assessment, which is part of our Healthy Living initiative. That on my team, I didn't really call out the members of my team, but we do have a patient navigator who is specifically identified to make sure we're focusing on the health needs of our residents during the redevelopment, which also can involve a lot of stress with the thoughts of relocation. The last thing I just want to add is, in redevelopment, I didn't really mention our relocation process, which is really important, especially with the landscape of Denver and how it has changed. There's a lot of concerns around gentrification and what that looks like, and that's something that Denver Housing Authority really puts a lot of intention towards making sure that that's why the community-driven process is a big part of this. All of the residents, all of Sun Valley residents that were here at the time of the awarding of the grant have the first right of refusal, is what we call it, which means they will be offered first the choice to live in one of the new units. We also do the construction in a phased approach. I did mention that we had 53 families that were relocated over the last year and a half, because they were in the first phase of construction. Those families we all met with and sat down and did interviews with them, and were able to relocate them to neighborhoods that they were connected to. And most of them, we had 19 families that elected to stay in Sun Valley, so we moved them to other Sun Valley units. And then others, I think we had about 60% of them that, besides those 19 that stayed within a 2-mile radius, because they had said that they are connected to this neighborhood. So we were able to keep them in the neighborhood. But we do the redevelopment in a phased approach so that we can keep as many families on site as long as possible. All families are offered a comparable unit in amongst Denver Housing Authority's portfolio, or they are offered a Section 8 voucher if they would like. And we do provide a relocation reimbursement check as well to cover their moving costs. And then we also still continue to work with them on case management.
Great, thanks, Shayna. So I'm gonna talk a little bit next about sort of this partnership that we're trying to develop between Shayna and her team at DHA and some of our academic research partners. So myself, Ellison, and Jeremy as representation, but not the entire team of our academic side here. So I'm an assistant professor at the Colorado School of Public Health in the Environmental and Occupational Health department. And my background is in environmental economics. I have worked a lot on impact evaluation design. So trying to develop methods and apply methods for looking at the impact of policies and programs on typically environmental and social and health outcomes. And so when I think, Jeremy and some of the other team members kind of introduced this possibility of working with Sun Valley, I was very excited to try and think about, this massive redevelopment that, that Shana was talking about, how can we as researchers lend our expertise and partner with the community to try and measure the impacts of this redevelopment on some of the outcomes that Shana was talking about, these health and economic and social well-being outcomes. So we are, as we're trying to do this, there's a lot of examples of sort of what we call bad research practices, where researchers kind of come in feeling like they know what the research questions are and they've got the answers, and come in, do their study for 3 to 5 years and then leave and publish their results, and kind of a lack of accountability. And so what we really wanted to make sure that we were doing to the best of our ability is to set up a partnership that so that our research benefits the community in concrete ways and responds to their needs. So some specific goals for this partnership and for our approach, for what we're kind of calling this community data lab approach, would be to support partnerships between researchers and the community, identifying areas of mutual interest. So again, as Shana outlined, there are several hopes that the community has about what this redevelopment may bring to the community in terms of health and social benefits, and so trying to identify those areas where we've got some expertise that can help us measure some of those outcomes, and but we're doing that in partnership with the community. Obviously, we think about opportunities for ourselves as academics to learn from community groups and design community engaged research projects, but also trying to think about ways to create opportunities for community members to participate in the research process, and also being very cognizant of the fact that that participation, particularly in a low resource community, we can't be asking people to volunteer their time or only to volunteer their time. That we need to make sure that we've got some opportunities to deliver some monetary benefits, to have paid research assistantships, for example, for community members. So we're trying to move in that direction. We want to make sure that we can leverage and disseminate our research results to promote community-driven change. So to be able to document, where things are going well, where where maybe some of the hoped for results aren't materializing, and being able to document that so that the community can go back to the funders or to DHA, sort of larger DHA, and say, hey, we were hoping that we would have more employment opportunities through this redevelopment, and we're not seeing that come to fruition. And then generating and sustaining funding sources to support long-term partnerships. So again, this goal of not, sort of this parachute research where we get in, get our research and get out, but trying to develop sustainable partnership over a longer time period, because we also know that, redevelopment, a lot of the problems and the issues that are that the redevelopment is addressing, won't change overnight, that it may take several years, and we may see, short-term, disruption from the redevelopment process and the relocations, but over the long term, maybe we will see those health improvements. And so we want to make sure that we are able to provide a more comprehensive picture of what this looks like over time. Next slide, Jeremy. So as we're doing this, we're trying to look at and learn from models that have been developed in other places. So there's several examples. 2015 review found 140 examples of what were called community-based research review processes. These have some similarities to the kind of partnership that we are hoping to develop and build on. I have listed here some of the sort of facets, features of these different examples, and one example here is the Bronx Community Research Review Board. Their slogan, which is small on the slide, is "No research about us without us." So that kind of idea of, if you're going to come in and do research in this community, let's make sure that there is a way for that for the community to be meaningfully involved, and even in some cases, driving that research agenda. Last slide. my set. So how are we doing this in Sun Valley? What are some of the steps that we've taken so far? We're making sure that the pilot grants that we've been submitting so far and have funded to support this partnership, really focus on relationship building, because again, a lot of this is about, you know, just getting to know each other. So you know, us getting to know Shayna and her team, and really understanding the needs and perspective of the community. So that partnership with the DHA office, and I think Shayna may have mentioned in passing in her comments that they, you know, in the team have this community connector position. So they have, you know, folks that rotate through that, and it's so this provides, you know, a paid opportunity for residents to work in the DHA office, and we're, you know, thinking about how to build on that and provide additional resources to support community, you know, resident engagement in the research efforts as well. We've conducted some informational interviews with different community groups using a framework called the asset-based community development model. The nice thing about this model is that it's not just focused on, you know, what's wrong with Sun Valley. We know that every community has a lot of assets. Shayna again touched on some of these, you know, rich diversity of residents and resident perspectives, you know, and so thinking about, you know, in the redevelopment process, what are the things, not only what are the things that the community wants to change, but what are also the things that the community doesn't want to lose, right? That they want to make sure that they can build on through that process. So trying to have, you know, that as part of our research agenda as well, is not just focusing on the deficits, but also focusing on the assets and the aspirations of the community. So Jeremy will talk a little bit more about some of this work, but you know, we've also engaged in some work developing and implementing what's called a photo voice project, which is basically, you know, the basic idea is just having residents take pictures of you know, some facet of their lives and sharing stories about that. That's a really great way, again, for us to calibrate and set our research agenda by understanding what's important to the community, but also a way for the community to be involved as, you know, sort of a citizen science kind of approach. So to be involved in collecting data and you know, in sort of concretely framing, you know, with these pictures, our perspective on their community. And finally, again, as Jeremy will talk about, you know, collaborating on analysis and implementation of the resident surveys that Shayna mentioned. So as researchers, as a social science researcher myself, I have a lot of experience with social surveys, and so how can we leverage that that expertise to help Shayna and her team, you know, understand again what's kind of happening, and conducting some of the analysis of these surveys, and then again also including residents in that data collection process, not just as the research subjects, but, you know, as the folks who are helping us conduct interviews or you know, motivate folks to complete their surveys, and then in the sort of dissemination and analysis of results as well. So those are just some of the things we're trying to do to kind of move this idea forward of having meaningful partnerships and a research agenda that benefits the community as much or more as it does the research team here.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so I'm going to take it from here and talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing on the ground with Shayna and the Sun Valley residents. Again, my background, I'm a postdoc researcher over at Colorado State University in environmental health. My background is more quantitative, but now I'm moving more towards community-based research, and that entails a lot more non-quantitative work. And I'll discuss a little bit about that here. So one thing myself and a couple other folks at Colorado State and CU Anschutz are working on is evaluating the redevelopment with CNI and providing some technical assistance along with the residents and the data lab. What we're interested in is how does the redevelopment process impact the health of the Sun Valley residents, and how will the new redevelopment improve the health of the Sun Valley residents? So during this process, right, there's lots of construction going on, there's disruption in the community, right? And so trying to look at how this disruption impacts the health, the mental health, the physical health, and the community health in Sun Valley. And then when residents move from these older homes, you know, some of these homes were built in the 50s, they are duplex style, you know, 2-story um, they have issues. They're going to be moving into these new apartment style housing, and how could their health potentially benefit from that, from having managed central air? Currently, they don't have air conditioning and other aspects like that. So CNI has been conducting surveys since 2015, which Shana mentioned, to attempt to evaluate the changes in the health and employment, education, and the community perception of the residents during this process and after the process. So what we're doing now is we're evaluating these surveys to try to establish a baseline of health for the residents. So since 2015, so we've got about 4 years worth of survey data, asking residents about chronic health conditions, asking them about perceived safety in the environment, things that Shana brought up earlier. We can establish this baseline so that when development is accomplished and folks move into the newer units, and then again their question about their health and their employment and their education, do we see improvements across these characteristics of the residents in the community? So I just want to highlight a little bit about what the community looks like, a little bit more than what Shana and Catherine brought up. It's an incredibly diverse community, so much more so than the rest of Denver. It's diverse in terms of languages, in terms of the cultures, right? It's got a large immigrant population, large refugee population. The age structure is much different than what we see in the rest of Denver. We get a huge mix of different types of families. As you can see here, you get large family size that we don't usually see in, like, for example, in downtown Denver, which, is younger urban professionals, singles and small couples, small families. At the same time, we see that the residents, especially the head of households, have issues that may not be as common in other parts of the city. 54% of the head of households reported having a chronic health condition in the survey last year. So that includes asthma, diabetes, blood pressure, and other chronic issues. And 20% of the head of households have some sort of permanent disability. So designing a community and designing units, we need to consider these aspects of who's going to be moving in. Also, and as Katie mentioned, this photo voice project. So during the COVID quarantine, we wanted to use some of our resources, which had been disrupted because of the pandemic, and our evaluation and our assistance with CNI. We funneled some of our work to try to help the residents document their experiences during this crisis. So what we did was we gave 17 households, cameras, and they were to just take photos of what was going on during this period. The children had access to the cameras, the adults had access to the cameras, and after they'd taken several pictures, we began conducting interviews with residents and asking them why they took these photos and why they felt connected to these images. And some of the things, and we've only done a couple interviews so far, but some of these things that we've been hearing is that residents had the opportunity of spending more time with their family, especially with their kids during this crisis, being home at all the time. But there are also several concerns that were brought up. One of these things is that the future apartments won't have the same green space access. Right now, they can walk outside their door and onto grass. And they're concerned that when they move into these apartment styles, right, they're going to be in the hallway. There's going to be a hallway and then an elevator, a stairwell, and then an entrance. They're going to have to, travel. It's may not think it's like significant distance, but it's a big change going from being able to walk right outside onto grass to having to spend a few minutes and to go outside. There's also concerns about what the neighborhood and the future residents are going to be like in the future development. It's going to be mixed income, so there's going to be even more diversity in the neighborhood, and folks are a little concerned about that. And tensions amongst these different families of during the COVID period. Folks had been inside for quite a while, and yeah, how it can be, if you're trapped inside for for a while with your family, and yeah, you know, you've got neighbors and noise and other issues, you know, tensions can flare up. So yeah, so we're in the process of finalizing these interviews and you know, collecting more information, and then I think the intent is to have the residents display, you know, these images and their experiences to the community, and maybe maybe to a larger community too at some point. I hand it off to Ellison.
Jeremy, should I go ahead and share my screen? Even I sent my slides, but
Yeah,
I'll run my own slides. Okay. So let me start this. So hello, everyone. I'm Ellison Carter. I'm based at Colorado State University, and I'm an assistant professor in environmental engineering. I'm also affiliated with the Colorado School of Public Health through Colorado State University. My background in PhD is in environmental engineering, and I've focused on primarily air quality indoors and how outdoor air quality can impact indoor residential environments and exposure to air pollution. And I have studied patterns and predictors of air pollution exposures to try and understand how the indoor environment could be used to intervene on and mitigate those exposures. What I had wanted to share with the group was sort of an underlying conceptual framework that that guides the way I do my work and the position that it sort of fills within this larger team of, you know, diverse researchers, but also diverse stakeholders and residents. So I actually kind of want to start over on the right-hand side of this slide. So if we're interested in understanding chronic disease and mental health outcomes, we know that there are a wide range of environmental and genetic and behavioral risk factors that can contribute to those outcomes. And the exposures that fall within the social and environmental category are the ones that the work that I do is either collaborating with or directly informing. And so those exposures can include things like psychosocial stress and quality of life measures, as well as thermal comfort and sleep quality, and further exposure to indoor and ambient air pollution. And these exposures are influenced by a wide range of determinants. Not all of them are represented in this green box here under exposure determinants, but these are some of the primary determinants that can influence exposures that ultimately influence both physical and psychosocial health outcomes. So we can think of things like financial burdens associated with the energy cost of heating or cooling your home, your perceptions of your home and your perceptions of safety, as well as your perceptions of comfort, can influence these exposures. Your ability to control the thermal environment and control your sleep environment, so controlling noise, controlling temperature, can influence your exposure to heat and cold, but also psychosocial stress. And the indoor environment is frequently viewed as a place that would be protective of pollution that's outdoors, particularly, you know, we think about it in the Front Range as being a place where the outdoor air quality is a problem, but maybe the indoor air quality is not. But the infiltration of outdoor air is a common pathway through which people are exposed to air pollution that influences their health. And then there are things that people do indoors that emit air pollution in its own right. So things that are essential services like cooking and cleaning, and things that are related more to comfort or personal preferences like use of candles or personal care products. And these all contribute to some of the social and environmental exposures that ultimately influence health. And so what I want to actually link that to on the far left-hand side of the slide is that the physical quality of the home and the physical environment plays a role in these social and environmental exposures. So when we think about the Sun Valley redevelopment, something that we've talked about often is that people are getting new neighbors, they're also getting new housing, and that new housing is going to be substantially different than the housing they've been living in. The way that it's sealed against the outdoor environment, the way that it's insulated, the type and installation of windows, the heating and cooking systems that people will have access to, the appliances that they will have to use, and the ventilation systems. These will all likely be different, and in some cases substantially different, as Jeremy mentioned. Air conditioning, for instance, will likely be something that we know is not a part of the current Sun Valley housing, but will be a part of the new development. And these can change exposure determinants beneficially, and they can also change them adversely. So one of the things that we are, and my team is trying to contribute to this overall redevelopment impact evaluation, is understanding how the new housing changes relative to the old housing, and also how people interact with their housing environment. So it's not just a static space that once defined, we know how it influences people's exposures and health, but it's a system that people are intimately involved with on a daily basis, making decisions actively, like on purpose. They might change their thermostat, and also passively, or not necessarily with the intent to influence an exposure. So they might walk in and it just may be their habit to open a window. So we want to understand how people are behaving in their home, and how we could use that understanding to help them maintain and sustain a healthy indoor environment. I wanted to reiterate, so I'm stealing from Katie Dickinson here. I really did want to reiterate that our motivation as an entire team is that we want any research that we do in Sun Valley to benefit the community in concrete ways. And so I've tried to highlight here some of the specific goals that the domain of expertise and work that I bring to the team is seeking to achieve. So one of our, we recently submitted a grant proposal to HUD to support development of sustainable models for shared governance of the indoor environment, and particularly housing intervention. So we know that asthma management is, or the prevalence of asthma is high in this community, and so asthma management may be quite variable. Much of the research, and one of the researchers that's not able to join, but Jeremy and I both work with, as well as Katie, is Cheryl Magzaman at the Colorado School of Public Health at CSU in the Environmental Health Department. She's an asthma epidemiologist and has done a lot of work over the years on asthma management programs. And one of the shortcomings is that they are highly effective within the research program, and yet the sustainability of funding and labor and resources that are needed to maintain the asthma management after the course of research has finished is usually very low relative to what it was during the research. So something we're trying to understand is how the burden of responsibility to manage asthma could be more equitably distributed in a shared governance model where the residents are in control of their environment to some extent, but it's also managed by property management staff and maintenance and custodial services that historically are responding to complaints, but could be acting more preventatively to support families in managing asthma and asthma exacerbations. Another goal we have, again, this is sort of predicated on what we're learning through the relationship building and data office. This may not rise to the level of priority in the near term, but we do think that it is essential to measure indoor environmental quality if we hope to manage it well. And so we are interested in developing cost-effective and user-friendly systems for that measurement. So something that my group works on is the selection and implementation of sensor systems that can measure physical parameters of the indoor environment, like temperature, relative humidity, and air pollution. Another goal that we have highlighted here is our desire to engage with community members and residents to learn about what their experience is like in their home, so we can close these implementation gaps, that I think Katie alluded to. It's not infrequent that indoor environmental researchers might think, the primary problem is X, when in fact what people are dealing with in their home is another problem. So a common problem is that people are more frequently dealing with thermal comfort issues, and indoor environmental quality researchers are focused on air pollution and its infiltration. But those two interests can actually be aligned well so that we could both improve indoor environmental quality while addressing the more critical concern of thermal comfort. And then lastly, I wanted to just reiterate this goal that all of us have, which is to generate and sustain funding sources to support long-term partnerships that engage with the residents in truly meaningful ways. And so lastly, I just wanted to highlight something that we're doing. It's been probably paused a bit because of the pandemic and public health response, but we have been measuring indoor air quality and air pollution in unoccupied housing units. So what's shown up here in the upper right-hand corner is an aerial map of the Sun Valley community, and we have been selecting housing units that are unoccupied for either extended periods of time or permanently as people are moving out to in preparation for the larger move to the new housing. And we are trying to understand what the indoor air quality is in unoccupied homes so that we can have a better understanding of the contribution that people and their behaviors make to indoor air quality, both beneficially and adversely. So the device on the left, the box with the number 82 on it, is a sensor that can measure 3 or 4 different air pollutants, as well as temperature, relative humidity, light, and noise. And these are devices that we would be planning to also install in new housing if possible. And then the device that's black collects air pollution on a filter that allows us to understand the contribution that things like traffic-related air pollution are making to people's exposures in their homes. And then the data that we're showing are some of the real-time air pollutant concentrations that we might collect over the span of a week. And I'm showing 3 different distances from roadways. So the red line is the closest to the interstate, and the green line is the next closest to the interstate, and the blue line is the furthest from the interstate. So in the Sun Valley community, we expect that I-25 is the dominant source of traffic-related air pollution, and the data that we've collected in homes where no people are currently living seem to reflect that. So those are, it's just one example of the kind of measurements that we have going on currently and plan to pursue and further later this fall, provided that we're able to meet the safety protocols associated with the global health response. So I'll end there. I think we were hoping that there would be time for questions and conversation perhaps with panelists. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I guess turn it back to Philip.
Yeah, thanks, Ellison. This is Philip and Mark. I'm with Housing Colorado. I'm your host here. And so we do want to open it up for questions now. You have a couple of options there. If you have, you just want to type out a question into the chat box, I'll be happy to pass that along to our panelists and we can discuss. But if it's easier for you or you want to have more of a discussion, feel free to use the raise your hand feature and I'll unmute you and you can talk directly to them. So I'll just give a couple of seconds here for folks to formulate their questions or comments. If anyone wants to throw that into the box. I will just give a couple more minutes for questions if anybody comes up with any, but while we're waiting, I just want to remind everybody that I will be sending out an email, or rather Dora from our office will, with the link to the recording of this, as well as the slides that were used today. And Jeremy, actually, I noticed that that's not in your slides. I wanted to ask, are you okay with sharing your contact information?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you mind sending me an email when we're done here today with the contact information for whomever you'd like to share, and then I can include that in that email that goes out to everybody if they have further questions down the road. Cool. I do see a question here from Hannah. They're asking, is the data available online somewhere, and will there be a final report?
So some of the data, like the survey data, for example, that's CNI's data. You'll have to speak with Shane about that.
Yeah, so this is Shana. So to answer that question, Yes, the data is here with my team, and I do share it with the group who has a team member not on this call that's working to consolidate so we can do a comparison, especially over the last 4 years. So that can be made available once it's in its final format, yes.
And when do you anticipate that final format? I'm sorry?
I actually just sent her we just got the data sharing agreement finalized, so we were waiting on that because we wanted to dig into it even deeper, where we could actually look at our residents who were here the year 1 of the survey to now, so we can really see the difference between the residents that have been here the whole time. So I actually have sent her 1 of those 4 as of yesterday, and we'll be sending her the remaining today. So I would say, I don't know how long it takes to put that stuff together, at least within the next month.
Sure. And
sorry, give Shana an opportunity to plug her amazing website. Shana's got a great website that we could also put, send out with the contact information. I think that would be a great place over time for us to share some of these reports and products that we put together.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. We put that website up once the pandemic hit. We'd always wanted to get it, but that really put the fire under it. So we do have a website up right now, and it's www.sunvalleyredevelopment.com. And there is a page dedicated for data, which was always the plan for the home for this. So that is where the final product would be to go, but feel free to visit for other information on the neighborhood as well.
great, thanks. I have another question here from Donna. Will there be supportive services after the project is completed, i.e. daycare, preschool, educational opportunities, et cetera?
That's a great question. So the neighborhood currently has 4 early childhood centers in the neighborhood that we work and have as one of our metrics for HUD is identifying families that have those children of those ages and trying to get them enrolled in those slots and those subsidized slots. So that's always been a goal. Before the CNI people team came to Sun Valley, there was a service coordinator who actually transitioned to our team. He was here for 5 years. So historically, each of our developments has a service coordinator grant through HUD. So there is always a team member identified to do services. So maybe not at the level that we're doing now, but there will still be somebody to work and do case management with the residents. In the next phase of construction, our building hasn't gone through its final design plans, but because of the results we've heard from the survey, which is more child services, we are looking at putting another early childhood center / child care, maybe a drop-off center for families that are enrolled in classes or just need that temporary care. So we have heard that from the community that there's a greater need for that and a need beyond what is currently here. Like I said, the drop-off services, the family just needs to just have a temporary child assistance need. So yes, we are looking at doing that.
Okay, thank you. I'll give it just a couple more seconds for folks to ask questions. We still have a couple minutes left if we need, but I do want to thank all of you, Katie, Jeremy, Ellison, and Shana, for your time. This has been super interesting, at least for me. I think it's been valuable for everybody, and we are really always grateful for all of the folks who help us out on these educational webinars. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. As I said, I will send out a link to that recording, as well as a link to the slides and the contact information and the website that we just discussed as soon as I have those from y'all. And thank you all for your time, and hope to see you on our next webinar.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.